Hello, Reagan.
Okay, yes. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Reagan Morrison, your moderator for today's session, What Does a Dishwasher Do? This session is being recorded and all participants have been muted. Our speaker will pause for questions throughout the presentation, so please pose your question in the chat screen or select the icon to raise your hand. It is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, John Puente, who is ODOT's Chief Data Officer and Administrator of the Data Governance Office. His office manages both policy and data standards utilized by the organization. John's office also oversees the collection of detailed business requirements and process documentation and helps manage the ancillary asset program for the DOT's Transportation Asset Management Plan implementation. Today, John will be presenting What Does a Dishwasher Do? This popular commercial catchphrase fits like a glove surrounding the idea of a data governance program. What does data governance do? Let's look at why it's important for ODOT to implement a program for managing one of its most valuable assets, our data. We will talk about why it's needed and why now. I mean, we're doing fine without it, right? We are mapping out the future of ODOT data, and this is what it means for you. John, if you would please make sure you're unmuted as we give you our full attention and welcome you to the 2020 ODOT Technology Conference.
Thanks, Reagan, and I apologize to the group for being a couple of minutes late. We had some technology issues, and as you guys know, I'm not very up on technology, so I couldn't get my my video to work. That's going to be part of this presentation. What I'll do, though, is I'm going to provide a link to you guys immediately following this, so you can go out and take a look at it for yourself. This would have been the first time that we've utilized it in any presentation, so you guys will be the first to see it. All right. So, what does a dishwasher do? If you guys have cable TV or able to get commercials, there's a lot of times that you'll see a commercial by the Cascade company, and there's a little girl. She watches her mom wash and rinse the dishes, and then she sees them put them in the dishwasher, and then she gets this really funny and perplexed look on her face and says, "What does a dishwasher do?" Okay, the reason being because she's seen her mom do all this advanced work and then still putting it in the dishwasher. Right, and what I found is this kind of response is right in line with our own data governance efforts. Right, I found this site. It was kind of cool. That actually talked about unusual uses for your dishwasher. It's called bargainbabe.com. Okay, and I listed here a number of those unusual uses that we're seeing, and I want to just talk about a few of those right now. So one of them is that, you can actually wash your kids' stuff in there because they say that you can drop it in a bag and then throw it in the dishwasher, right? Or you can actually toss your shoes in there. So flip-flops and your rain boots, they recommend those, but then they said, hey, don't throw your Crocs in there, probably because of the heat, they're probably going to melt on you, right? Or warp on you. And then you can also use it to wash your baseball caps because apparently it keeps the brim of the cap intact so it doesn't get all crumpled like it does in your dishwasher. And then one of the other things, and I found this to be highly unusual, they actually can use it to steam and poach your fish and your veggies. I don't know anybody myself that does that, and I don't know if you guys have ever done that, but did you even know that you could do it, right? So that's some of the things that we're looking at with dishwashers that we just didn't understand in the past. And then there's always this, right? So just picture, right? You guys are on an ODOT call and you say, hey, would somebody please play with the cat? I'm on a Teams call. And then the kids are like, okay, I got it, Dad, I got it. Okay, and then they get the cat to start playing with the dishwasher, right? But in the end, it just keeps both the kids and the cat entertained for hours. And what I'm getting at here in the point is that there's a lot of ways to interpret the use, right? That's the same thing with data governance. We're going to take a look at how and why data governance at ODOT, especially now, and trying to give you an understanding of where you actually fit into that. So if you take a look at this graphic and imagine your role, the question is going to be, where exactly do you fit in? Is there any place here that you actually see yourself? Because that's the question we're going to try and understand today. What does a dishwasher do, and how am I a part of it? And in this case, we're actually talking about data governance. How am I a part of it? So if you look around the slide, you're looking at a number of things. This graphic I picked up off of a website that was specific to data governance in some of the places that we touched that we're not truly familiar with at times. So if you are in the architecture group, that's a big part of it. A database based off of that architecture that we've implemented here and standardized here at ODOT through our information technology division is based off of that, right? We also have analytics and we have data quality. There's also that security. Everybody knows that we need to try and keep our data secure. And I'm going to point out here in just a second, that's one of the main reasons for the implementation of a data governance strategy. All right. Then you also have content management. This is everything that has to do with the data itself. What is it, in layman's terms, especially, how can individuals understand how to use that data and how that data is going to benefit them? And if they do, is it of quality and is it secure? Those are big things. And then we also throw into that our privacy, because we need to make sure that we're taking care of our customers, which includes our externals. And I'll talk about that here too. All right, so what does it do? What does data governance do? The first thing is that it establishes the data quality. What it does by utilizing standards and policy is allows apples to apples comparison of all of our data across the enterprise. Now, can everything be standardized? No. Can it be standardized all at once? That's a no also, because we'll have to take into account the resources that we have available and the funding that we have available to do that. And that's something that's a serious consideration right now, especially with COVID, because we are down on funding and we're down on resources themselves, right? The next thing is that it actually identifies who's accountable for setting the rules to manage this data. That's part of the ownership. We call those data business owners. They're able to set those rules of engagement and those standard business requirements that help them to succeed in fulfilling their requirements, as well as everybody that uses that data. Okay, it's the how, when, and why that they help us to provide. All right, the policy. This is where we can provide that departmental policy to follow enterprise standards and to make it all fit together. If and when we bring those assets together, if and when we bring that data together, whether it's finance or construction projects or anything having to do with time management with the EIMS, how is it that they're going to fit together like a glove? So it's seamless to our users on how we can accomplish that. Well, that's done through policy. And if we do it correctly, this is going to be something that's very transparent to them. They're not going to have to know how, they just know it did, right? And then we also put our policies in place to help protect data. This is not only protecting the individual privacy, but it also protects your privacy as well. You have a lot of information that's in ODOT systems and DAS systems that needs to maintain its privacy, and the wrong people are not to get in and be able to have access to this data, let alone we shouldn't be able to distribute it or lose it with some sort of security breach, because that's very important. That's a big part of why we need data governance. And if we structure and organize the data correctly, a data warehouse can be modeled after ODOT specific needs where we can bring it all together. And that's what that is. So what are our tools for success? Now, you've probably seen this image before when we talked about asset management, and it still holds true here. There are three key ingredients for what we're trying to accomplish, and we need all these three to work together to do our best in managing data at ODOT. The first is the people. So today we're going to look at, just like we did on the last slide, where you fit in. How are you part of this, and how can you help the organization manage what we're trying to accomplish? The second is our processes. We'll take a look at a few examples of the structure of the policy surrounding data governance and some of the tools that we're going to have available for us to be able to accomplish that. And that's part of the technology stack, right? So we'll look at a couple of examples of those. And through the presentation, what I hope to realize with you is we're going to figure out who's going to do it, what they'll do, and then how they're going to do it. So again, that goes back to people, processes, and technology. All right, so let's get rolling here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to touch on the people and just some quick examples of how that happens. So we all assume different roles here at ODOT, but the underlying fact is that we're here to provide a safe and manageable system to the public and our users. And this can take a number of forms, anywhere from the construction project information or implementing new technologies to do our job or allow others to do their jobs more efficiently, to creating code, or even capturing requirements for projects that run through the PMO office. And as you'll see in the next slide that I have, we should be able to connect the dots back to ourselves as individuals. And what you're going to find is that there's a number of instances where we are involved, right? And as you saw in the earlier slide, data governance is literally a part of everything that we do here at ODOT. This is a data lifecycle diagram. I've brought this up in a number of presentations before, but I wanted to touch on it just a hair differently here. So what I want you to do is I want you to picture yourself in these scenarios. You know, when it comes to the life cycle of data, where do you fit in? Okay, as you can see, there's a great chance that you're going to fit into at least one, if not many of the stages in managing the data through its existence here at ODOT, right? So we'll call this the data life cycle. Now, hopefully it's easier for you guys to see, but the life of the data includes a number of stages, we'll call them. And the first one, we're planning for it. This is where we create our and gather our requirements. So if you're part of the PMO group, this is where you can start to realize the kind of information that you're going to have to gather that's based off of standards that are enterprise for ODOT, according to their data. We're going to have both enterprise standards as well as we're going to have critical data elements as part of each business set. Okay, so there may be things that the Ellis project needs in order for it to function and report correctly, whether it's to our stakeholders in the district so they can create work plans, or if it's something that they later on down the road have to be able to provide to finance, so finance can do their job and get some money back from the federal government for projects that involve their participation, right? Something that they've agreed to. And then the other thing is that we need to, in the planning stage, we're also considering what we're doing with service level agreements as well as data sharing agreements. So if we are going to provide information to anybody or they're going to provide information to us, we need to make sure that those contracts are standardized so we receive and we distribute the data in line with what the policies and rules of engagement are that we've already set in place. And we're going to do this through conversations with not only the data business owners and their stakeholders, but as well as the data governance committee, which is a structure to help us to make those kinds of decisions. The second phase, we'll call it, is actually creating the data. Now, there's a number of ways that we can do this. We can provide applications like we do for asset management that our tech services group puts together. And they can collect and self-serve by collecting information on both inventory and inspection, let's say, if we were talking about an asset. And but there's also a number of other ways to be able to get that. If we're updating existing data, we could actually do it through a third party or even collecting new data. We could do that through a third party. So again, going back to the planning of it, those agreements have to be in place in order to allow us to get that information in the way that is most beneficial to the organization. So we don't have to clean it up because we gave them those requirements on the front end. We don't have to fix it as a deliverable before we can even attempt to use it, right? And then the next phase would be maintaining it. This is gives us an opportunity where we can actually cleanse the data and actually reconcile it with other data sets, which pushes us to the assimilate. Okay, in assimilating, we're joining it with other data sets in order to provide more functionality and actually create information off of the raw data as we've gathered those in individual efforts. This allows us to publish enterprise data for analysis, right? And this allows us to be able to do analytics on it. And it also allows us to develop a warehouse structure or complete a warehouse structure that meets the organizational needs. Okay. The next one is where you can see just about everybody that's at ODOT. This includes just using the data. So if we've planned for it, we've created it, now we have the raw data, right? We're maintaining it on a cycle that's approved by the data business owner when they set their guidelines and achieving their goals for reporting or whatever that may be. And then we've joined it with other data at this point. So what we're doing now is actually retrieving that information. We're making business decisions in every one of our divisions here at ODOT, right? As you're talking about using it for analytics, for BI tools with our Power BI experts, using it with feature manipulation engine, anything. It depends on what the need is and what the right tool is, but we're able to retrieve and then communicate that data to our users, right? That's part of the distribution. So we take that data and we prepare it so we can do a number of things like I talked about a second ago. We can do federal reporting, we can do critical success factor monitoring. And that's something that's important to us is that we not only have to have accurate and timely data, but we also need to report to make sure that we're meeting the goals of the organization as well as the individual business units. So we'll have KPIs within the business units, but it ultimately is going to roll up and it's going to meet a critical success factor for the organization. And that's where we want to be, right? And with this distribution, we're doing this a number of ways. We can do it with the federal reporting. We can also provide websites that allow our users and the externals to be able to self-serve. Our TIMS application is a good example of that. It allows individuals both in and out of the state to go grab information at their beck and call. They can self-serve and they can get exactly what they're looking for virtually any data set that we have here at ODOT. Okay. And then we're also distributing a lot of this information, especially when it's project related, through public media organizations. So we need to make sure with data governance and through this life cycle that what we're distributing, it meets the needs of not only our users, but it also meets the needs of the organization because we need to protect the data that we have and distribute. So we can, honestly, aside from personal and confidential information and data that's critical to our infrastructure, we should be able to distribute that data for our users to be able to consume and to utilize in a fashion that they find deemable for their process. And then finally, we are retiring or actually purging the data to remove it from our data warehouses, right? That can be done in a number of ways. When data has met its life cycle at the end of life, we are either going to archive it or we're going to purge it, okay? And we can actually do this same kind of methodology or thinking with systems because, and I'll give you an example. So if you think of a mainframe right now, we actually still have a couple of applications that are not only providing an application within that infrastructure, but they're actually maintaining the data within there too. As we move away from that and enhance those applications and move it to new platforms, there's going to come a day and a time when the mainframe itself can be eliminated, right? And that's something that I know that the Do It is looking to do within the next year or so. And if they can get those applications into other up-to-date systems, they'll be able to retire the use of that functionality within the mainframe. And that's something that's going to be good for the organization, because it not only saves time, but it also saves a lot of money. Right? And throughout this data lifecycle, we actually are maintaining a lot of documentation, maintaining quality of our data, and then actually doing the backup and restoring. And I'll talk a little bit later about some of the data that we collect. And I'm sure you'll be surprised of the quantity of data that we're collecting that's not really known to everybody other than those dealing directly with those servers or that storage area. This is something that we should consider as we make requests on anything that we have coming from those business areas. Okay. All right. So why do we manage? Let's ask ourselves a question. Why do we need to provide structure around our data? Well, there's some big and obvious reasons. There could be state and federal regulations. Chief Legal has also given us some guidelines on how to maintain and distribute and purge data, even because they've given us those cycles. It's also sometimes, depending on the data, going to be part of the Ohio Revised Code. And again, it's also for federal reporting. So essentially what we're trying to do is protect not only the public's interest, but yours as well. Because as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of information out there, whether it's uniquely identifiable, like your social security number and your home address, or it could be something that's actually put together with another data set that's readily available to help them combine those individual confidential information pieces. And that can be like having a tag from your vehicle or your VIN number, and somebody going into and open an account or database and be able to piecemeal the other data together to get a lot of information about you. Because what we don't want to do, like it says in the slide, is we are trying to prevent any kind of harm, embarrassment, inconvenience, or unfairness to any individual, right? Or the business itself. Something that we do with the electronic signatures is we actually create a security document, and GAS has mandated that we do this so we can figure out if something was breached, how much of an effect would it have not only on the individual, but the organization itself. And that could be bad publicity. That could be us distributing or losing information that's pertained to, let's say, private bids on contracts. If they're sealed bids, we're not supposed to have any access to that, except if it's part of your duty within the Office of Estimating, as they're and awarding projects with the Office of Contracts. So those are kind of things that we need to take into consideration as we're trying to manage the quantity of data that we have. All right. So again, why? Well, it takes a lot of time to clean up data on the back end. It's not cost effective, nor is it a good use of time to do it that way. So imagine the extra time that we would all have if we didn't have to convert data to meet the reporting mandates every single year, or if we weren't band-aiding legacy systems that can't meet our current enterprise standards, or those that we're going to have in the future. That's going to give us more time to become innovative, like Charles mentioned this morning. It's going to give us more time to be innovative instead of reactionary to the needs of our customers. So if we fix it on the front end, as I mentioned earlier, instead of on the back end, it's going to be a simple idea that we can bring to fruition by doing data governance. Now, it's going to take time, right? But it is an attainable goal for the organization. And I think, and I know that if we do this correctly, that over time that we're going to be able to realize a lot of good benefits from what we're trying to do. All right. Before I get into the technology portion, is there any questions so far of anything that I brought up in the presentation?
None yet posed in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. Okay, so what we'll do now is let's take a look at just a couple of technology tools that we can use to help us to manage our data, okay? So the first one is actually an example of something that's being implemented by Do It right now as we speak for ODA. The product is called Varonis. This tool is going to help the data governance staff as well as Do It monitor the data for a number of type of risks. Also threats and even breach attempts. So the cool part of it is that we can actually add the rules in the application based off some of the data governance standards and policies that we've created in order to help what we call cleanse the data. So Varonis itself is a data management tool, right? It protects your data. It notifies you of security threats. You can add governance compliance rules to it, just like as I mentioned, and it'll actually report on those, and then automatically send notifications to the right people based off of the conditions that were met in case there's some sort of issue. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we're talking about the idea of having that PII breached. So we don't want to be able to, we don't want to actually allow anybody to be able to do that. All right. And as you're going to see with the screenshots coming up, this is a tool that provides a variety of methods to monitor our data, and it can track who opened what file, how long they were actually in there, and then provides notifications of threats and a lot more. But what I want to remind you with this application is that this is meant to provide security to sensitive information within our systems. And this is not to track your every move. There's no need to worry about being under a microscope here, guys. Again, this tool is meant to protect the data and the personal information only. And it gives both my office, as we start monitoring what's happening with folders all the way down to individual files for the content and the security of each. It allows us and Do It a good tool to be able to accomplish that. All right. As mentioned earlier, the security of our data is a key part of data governance, and tools such as this is going to help us to keep your data safe. In Varonis, it allows you to manage folder access, similar to what we do now, right, at the folder level with other applications. But it allows for file security, and it allows you to actually password protect individual documents and allow for encryption for your data, whether it's in flight or at rest. Okay, and right now this is monitoring the Isilon, and they're creating a number of great reports from it to provide information that's needed in order to establish our security guidelines and our policy around it. Right, so it's essentially finding out who can view it, when can they view it, and then how can they view it, or how can they actually utilize that data itself. Okay, so during this fiscal year, oops, I got a little typo there. So we're switching over now to a second tool. This is the data cataloging tool. So during the fiscal year, this office is going to look to capture requirements to introduce a data cataloging tool that's going to help us to organize and document the data that we currently use, right? Reason for doing this? Well, we can't realistically move to introducing any type of warehouse configuration or building requirements for a warehouse until we fully understand the relationships of the data we currently have in place. It's like building a house for the most part. You create a sound foundation, and then it'll allow us to build a great structure on top, right? So what is the data catalog? What are we looking at? So in front of you, this is an example of some of the tools that are available to help us organize and define what we already have. And it's not cost effective, nor do we have resources available to do all the systems all at once, like I mentioned earlier, because it's just not feasible. But there is a way to do it and become very cost effective or very effective as an organization, even as we mature the as a mature data governance program itself. So the catalog, what it allows us to do, and there's an upcoming slide that's going to show this kind of visually, is it allows us to track the data lineage. What's going to affect or be affected downstream if we make changes to any tables or even the attributes within a table. If we changed, let's say, the PID from XYZ to ABC, what does that actually do? What does it affect downstream, and what kind of considerations do we have to be able to do this kind of change? The second thing is automation. The applications that we're looking at actually have automation built in, doing AI, machine learning. We're able to do discoveries and identify data glossaries that are in existence, and then provide the similarities between the two and the differences for that matter, right? And then what this allows us to do is to build those integrations to see later on what exactly is affected when we make that change, like I spoke about a second ago, right? It also identifies the relationships between not only the different systems, but the tables within a system. So we're looking at those relationships to see if there's a one-to-many or a many-to-one relationship, and then what actually is happening within that relationship, right? Because we have to identify what our table structure looks like before we can actually understand how we're going to be able to model something in the future to account for those types of relationships. And lastly, on this slide, it actually is a way to allow our users to explore data and to find that source data. So the term one-stop shop is used a lot. This is where you can jump in as an analyst and say, I want to see everything that has to do with a structure file number. And it's going to run out and it's going to pinpoint that it's in GQL, that it's in Alice, that it's in TIMS, that it's in the structure application itself, and show you all of those instances and allow you the opportunity to be able to find what the source is, so you can utilize the source or you can utilize the information, I should say, as close to the source as possible in order to do your analysis. All right. Now, we've all heard how it's our job to actually turn data into information, right? But something was always missing. In the middle of all this is where that data catalog should be. Okay, this data catalog is going to actually contain 3 parts that work in unison to become our library of sorts. The first part is the technical data. This is where all our platforms, our applications, our tables, and their relationships reside, right? The next section is the controlling the metadata. This is where all our rules and our standards and our policy and data ownership reside, as well as identifying who's responsible for what. Kind of like what we talk about when we, if you're familiar with the RACI model, who's responsible for the data at what point in its life cycle. Kind of like we talked about a little bit earlier too, right? The last section is the semantic data. Now, this section is going to define the meaning and the context of the field attributes so everyone can understand it. And it has to be understandable, because if we make this available to our users, they're going to want to know what is there in layman terms. They're going to want to be able to understand it so it's not technical, it's not over everybody's heads. They don't have to be a data scientist to know what they're looking at or what they're looking for. All right. Now, so for those of you that are already thinking about the relationship, the data dictionary should be embedded in a good data catalog suite of applications. So that's another piece of information, we're calling it, that's part of a good data cataloging system. And as you can see by the graphics that are on the screen, our effort should include both local as well as cloud storage, right? where we store the data should not make a difference as to how we manage and protect it. We're going to have third-party vendors that are storing on our behalf. Maybe it's in the Amazon cloud or it's within the Microsoft cloud environment. But either way, the data that we have up there should be owned by ODOT, number one, but it also should be managed by ODOT. So if there is some sort of breach, that we're not caught in a bad spot, right?
Excuse me, John, you have about 8 minutes.
Okay, thank you. All right. So here is where we were actually going to take a look at the data governance video that could help us communicate our new initiative. Okay, and our hope was that this could be used as often as we can, both in ODOT as well as the national stages where we present the data governance program. And as I mentioned, I'm going to start it, but I'm going to slip right through it because the sound isn't projecting through, and I think it has to do with my headset, the way that it manages the sound within the PowerPoint presentation. So I'll provide this to you guys. Please take a look at it. I'll put it in this meeting Teams Skype, or excuse me, the Teams chat, and you guys can take a look at that independently. All right. I want to touch on just some of the different types of information that we actually collect at ODOT. And then we're going to run through these since we're down to the time. Oops, sorry. Let's talk about the UAS Center real quickly, okay? There's a lot of things that they collect. And right now, did you guys know that they actually collect about or have collected 320 terabyte of information in the last year alone, year and a half, I should say. Those are LiDAR point clouds, and that presentation was on just before this, so some of you might have saw it. Orthomosaic imagery, thermal imagery, 3D models, mapping, so on and so forth. They use the tools that they have available to them to provide bridge inspections, traffic monitoring counts. They also do disaster response assistance, and so on and so forth. And then we have Drive Ohio. Right? They're deeply involved with connected autonomous vehicles and utilizing sensor information that's coming through those vehicles. And as Charles spoke of this morning, there's a great amount of information that's being transmitted by our sensors. And I'll cover that a little bit more with ESP coming up next. This allows us to to monitor our traffic movements and do predictability modeling, which is really cool. And then the smart technologies allow vehicles that have the onboard systems to communicate back and forth with those sensors, right? And then there's also the corridor in US 33, that smart corridor, where they're installing towers that are going to have research devices put in them so they can, so companies can come in and do their own type of research and development with new products that are coming on board. That are here now and coming quickly in the future. So a lot of things come from Drive Ohio, so keep your eyes peeled for that. All right, then we have ESP. As Charles mentioned, there's 13 million records a minute being processed, and it's also providing instantaneous information to do real-time decisions, as well as providing historical information to be able to do predictability models as they can and with Drive Ohio in the future. And then lastly, ESP is also working with TSMO for traffic monitoring to identify and clear our roads of obstructions, including accidents and anything else that might cause a traffic backup. So you can imagine how much data is being transmitted to those vehicles after we heard what Charles said this morning, right? We also have the Pathways video log. And one thing I'll say about that right now, because I'm running out of time, is that they also collect a number of, or a large data set every single year. It's 15 to 20 terabytes, and they're storing 3 years of data in production archives, and then they're archiving the rest off to slower data centers, but they're still maintaining that data. All right, Isilon. Did you guys know that we're actually storing 330 terabytes of information today in the Isilon? And that's information that's backed up. That's information that is unstructured. And then this is where we don't have control of what it looks like. And it could be Excel spreadsheets, Word documents, PDFs, email copies, videos, movies, whatever that may be, right? Okay, our processes. Had some old timers back in my time at District 1 that used the phrase parts is parts, and that was about anything that had to do with design. So in our case, this is what has to do with data governance. I've gone over a few of these already, and here's some examples of where and who would be responsible for some of these items. So the policy, procedures, and standards would be the data governance office as well as the data governance committee, but also the project managers, ECT, developers, business analysts, data scientists. So you may not have seen yourself in these roles before, but now that you're sitting in on this video, you can see where some of that actually takes place. Privacy, that's everybody. Security, of course, it's our security team, our ECT, and our database groups, but that's all part of data governance, okay? This data transition matrix is something that we put out to help everybody to understand where their role is actually taking place. So if you look across the top, you have the data classification, you have where it's at in the life cycle, and then you have each one of the processes that are happening within the life cycle identified as to who should be taking a look at it and when they should be taking a look at it, right? This data transition matrix allows us to provide all of these functionalities, which is built into that matrix itself to identify who does what and when. We've looked at this before, but what I wanted to bring up in this venue was the relevance to this conversation. The first thing that it's an approved structure by the assistant directors, right? And then you can see how the data lifecycle management is captured here and how there's a hierarchy to how we manage our data. And then the support through implementation, through strategy on the left-hand side shows how we will work data through a process. So to make sure that everything that we're doing is actually for the good of the organization. All right, this shows really quickly the benefits of a good program. Improved quality, collaboration amongst the businesses, regulatory compliance, big parts of data governance itself. And then what is our goal here? The ultimate goal is being able to be transparent to our users. So if we do this right, we should be able to make our data governance concepts a staple in our daily processes that come natural to you whenever you play a role in that life cycle of the data, like we saw in the data matrix, right? But more importantly, our users shouldn't have to know what's happening, but they should be confident in our efforts to know that it does happen and that the decisions that they're making are actually made off of secure, quality, and attainable data. And we do this by doing the things that you see here on the slide. Making quality data accessible is one of the big things, but making sure it's in the right hands. And then also providing an understanding to our users as to why we're having to move in this direction, which that video will help you to understand, right? So we know that this is a big project within ODOT, and it's a big initiative, but like a dishwasher, we need to make sure that folks have a good understanding of why we're doing it and how it's going to make their jobs better in that long run. And most importantly, we're not doing this in a bubble. You know, how's it managed? By the way, the data governance committee that was formed, they help us to make decisions on data at ODOT, and we made sure to have representations of all types of data, like you saw, or you will see rather, in the video. Again, and I'm sure that you'll catch that there. And finally, as our logo states, we are managing information to save lives and money. Everybody at ODOT has a part. Hopefully, after today's presentation, you can see that you actually fit into a piece of that, if not in one place, maybe in many. And that's all I have. So I'm open to a couple of questions before we log off.
There is one question that just came in. How long ago did you put this process together?
So the data governance process itself was actually started in 2017. So that initial project, which included going out and doing an assessment and figuring out what we needed to do and how we needed to accomplish it, that ends at the end of this calendar year. But that's just the initial project. The implementation of data governance has started already and will be ongoing. And we actually have a 5-year plan that's available for anybody that's interested.
All right, That's all the questions I'm showing in the chat. And we are out of time. John, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you presenting at this year's technology conference.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.